Did you know that processed food companies spend $11 billion on research a year in the NIH into nutrition? And the NIH, last I checked, spends about has about $1 billion budget. So the food industry, and this is not kale farmers of America or beef farmers of America or egg, this is not unprocessed food, this is processed food companies.
Right.
10 to 11x what the NIH budget for nutrition studies is.
And they said that the CT angio, they had like a high amount of plaque, but their CIC score was still 0.
Yeah.
Depends what algogothim they use to interpret the CT angio.
You're getting dangerously close to things that I'm not supposed to talk about
I can
until
talk
Friday.
I can talk about it.
I can talk about.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Liz. I'm a medical technologist and pharmaceutical chemist with over 30 years of experience in the medical and pharmaceutical industries. I'm also a carnivore. I have been for almost 3 years now, and it changed my life in ways I could never have imagined. That's one of the reasons I started this channel, is to share my journey and discuss health and, medical topics in general. Today, I'm going to do a reaction video to a podcast where Dr. Nick Norwitz and Dr. Paul Saladino talk about everything from seed oils to health to food industry, the pharma industry. It's an extremely interesting video. Now, this video is titled Carnivore MD versus Harvard Doctor. Seed oils are actually good for you, which is kind of funny since they didn't really talk about seed oils that much in the video, really in the center of it. But the rest of this video was way more interesting. What intrigued me the most was this is within the orbit of what I refer to as the carnivore paradox, which is a trend that quite frankly goes up my butt like a rocket. Just saying. The carnivore paradox is where you see physicians in this space promoting this incredible and sometimes life-changing diet for themselves and for their patients, the reversal of all these medical conditions. And when they're talking about it, there's a little bit of pivot or hesitation regarding certain subjects. They follow up their glowing endorsements with phrases that sound like a nervous whisper, like, "We don't have any long-term studies on this," or, "Remember, we don't know the full effect on longevity," which are both true statements, but they're said in a way that can come off looking like they're promoting the diet, but at the same time, they're a little bit ashamed of it. First of all, why are they saying this about food that we've put in our mouth since forever? I mean, why did they feel the need to add these qualifiers? It kind of reminds me of that Seinfeld episode.
We're not gay. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
No, of course not.
Also, to be more accurate, they should say instead, "We don't have long-term data on any diet," or, "Remember, we don't know the full effect on longevity for any diet." There are a lot of kooky gurus out there making a lot of unfounded claims. I get it, but I would prefer more precision with the words that are used. My core criticism is simple. Animal products are food for human beings. They always have been, and they always will be. Not just that, but meat is what allowed us to evolve into the creatures that are at the top of the food chain. This diet is a return to a historical human staple. But in the modern era, the public and even many doctors have abandoned this history, turning instead to isolated, often hypothetical blood test parameters to dictate what a proper human diet should be. The public is often presented with this information as settled science, but a lot of it is just one piece in a much larger puzzle, an often misunderstood puzzle. This has happened before, and we need to remember that science has never settled. With all of this in mind, I found the following exchange between these two very interesting and also very surprising. So let's get into this.
Did you know that processed food companies spend $11 billion on research a year in the NIH into nutrition? And the NIH, last I checked, spends about has about $1 billion budget. So the food industry, and this is not kale farmers of America or beef farmers of America or egg, this is not unprocessed food, this is processed food companies.
Right.
10 to 11x what the NIH budget for nutrition studies is. So it's, you go
And
to
not only that, but they're hiring people from the NIH and the FDA to work in their companies.
and they have, yes, they do that after the people leave, right? There is a revolving door.
Yep.
And for 70, 80 years, industry has had its fingers in academia and in policymaking. I mean, the influence of what we think of as healthy, or the food pyramid, or the whole ethos, the whole zeitgeist of what we've thought of as healthy as Westernized Americans, which is kind of the context that we all live in, has been influenced by companies for 80 years. I mean, this is why there is a almost indelible mark on our society now that meat and saturated fat, things that Nick and I both eat pretty good amounts of, are harmful for you. It's very hard.
So I'm very impressed, I gotta say. I've heard a lot of different things about Paul Saladino, and he can be kind of over the top, I think, with a lot of the videos that I've seen with him as a personality, as a person, like as an influencer. But this is a very based take on the food industry. It's a very in-your-face type of approach that I really like. And he says some more things here that I really like. So I was rather impressed with him and surprised. I had followed Nick Norwitz more heavily than Paul Saladino. And I like things that both of these people are saying, right? So I guess this, for the most part, this segment shows an example of the type of, for the most part, most of the things, the type of approach that really should be pronounced more in the carnivore space. But
to erase that sort of programming that we've had since Ansel Keys, since the 1950s, since Eisenhower.
The 1950s, that's when R.J. Reynolds bought all these food companies, right?
Yeah.
1.9 billion. NIH spent approximately 1.9 billion on nutrition research in the fiscal year of 2019. That's insane.
And that pales in comparison to what private companies will spend. I mean,
right.
Coca-Cola itself, I believe between 2008 and 2016, funded 379, give or take, studies on sort of food. And those studies are generally aimed at advancing the narrative that weight loss is not about the quality of food you eat, it's about how much food you eat. So it's kind of advancing the calories narrative. It's okay to drink soda or eat candy as long as you exercise more or limit calories on the back end. In 2015, there was, I think, an expose in the New York Times about something called the Global Energy Balance Network. Have you heard of this?
No.
Oh, you've heard of it? It was funded by Coca-Cola. So this term energy balance gets thrown around a lot today by very, I think, preeminent people in the health and nutrition space. They'll say, it doesn't matter what you eat, just get enough protein and be in energy balance. But the global energy, I think this is very misleading. It's kind of like food quality doesn't matter, right? Global Energy Balance Network is funded by Coca-Cola, and they try and advance this notion. Again, it doesn't matter what you eat as long as you are in energy balance. It's again,
that's a marketing campaign. It's a very effective marketing campaign, because I'll tell you what, people in my household that eat the standard American diet parrot this. They parrot that, well, you just got to eat less and it's calories. Well, how many calories is this and how many calories is that? When actually, if you look at the science behind food calories, you look at how that's set up. I'm going to give you the high level. I do a video explaining why calories in general are a flawed science, but the gist of it is that in thermodynamics, okay, if you burn, let's say you have a bag of garbage and you burn it, it's going to let off so much heat. It's an energy transfer of, you're burning this material and you've got heat coming from it, correct? Yeah, that's true. And when you actually measure that, you put it in a chamber and you measure how much heat's coming from it, it tells, it gives you a relationship, right? Well, they did that with food. They're basically burning food in like a vessel. Our bodies are not incinerators. We're not an incinerator that you put garbage in. And just looking at a heat exchange, now that gives you information for sure, how many joules of energy and all that. And then you get even more simplified when you're looking at, this many calories for fat and this many calories for carbohydrates. It's like, that is so basic. That's like trying to explain the eyeball in 30 words or less. It doesn't make any sense. Like, if anybody knows anything about the eyeball, it's one of the most complex things in the body. It's just such a complex system. And, and the thing is that most physicians and stuff and researchers, they don't know how a lot of our bodies work, but they come to these conclusions for reasons, other reasons. They'll come up with settled science that are very high level, that have a lot of flaws, that have a lot of assumptions, and they do it usually with an agenda in mind. So just keep that at the forefront of your thoughts when you're actually looking at all of this nutritional space jargon.
Calories forward without any attention to food quality. Nick's story, my story, the story of thousands of people that I've interacted with personally, or hundreds of thousands that I've interacted with virtually, tell a different story, right? It's all about food quality. You've seen this too, right? It's not just about how many calories you eat.
Right.
It's about the quality of those calories. But there's something sinister going on beneath the surface.
Right.
Yeah, Global Energy Balance Network.
I would go a step further and say calories don't cause obesity.
I agree with you.
And I want to unpack that a little bit because I know where people's minds go and they have a visceral reaction. But I'm not saying calories don't matter. I'm not saying that. When you take the energy balance equation, calories in minus...
My take on that is like, stop saying calories. Say that overeating can lead to obesity, because it absolutely can. When we overeat, when you actually eat more of anything, fat, protein, carbs, anything, if you overeat, if you force your body to eat more food than you need, and you know when you need food, because if you know true satiety signals, you understand that. So if your satiety signals work and you are just overfeeding yourself, that's going to make you sick. Our body's not meant for that. We are not meant for that. We're not like a bear. We're not, we're not piling on and hibernating for the winter. Okay. Now, are we supposed to, do we eat more sometimes than other times, in times of scarcity and in times of plenty and that kind of thing? That's different. But when you're just cramming food down your gullet because you're addicted to it, that's going to make you sick regardless of what it is. But people keep saying, well, you have too many calories. No. It's not calories. It's mass. It's food. It's the amount of food that you're shoving down your hole, because it can be any food that will cause you problems. That's a clarification, but people keep saying calories. It's not calories. That's not it. That is a measurement with regard to heat released by certain foods. It's not as much of a thing as people think it is.
Calories out equals weight change. What is that? That is a post hoc description of what happened. It is not in any way, shape, or form a biological explanation for obesity. So I'm not saying calories in, calories out is a wrong model for obesity. I'm saying it's not a model at all. It doesn't give you a physiologic explanation. And the narrative around calories, I think, is one of those things where with enough exposure, just the mere exposure effect, you start to internalize a message, and then thinking gets shut down. Rather than thinking about the complex multifactorial cascade of factors that goes into determining what is ultimately the dependent variable, not the independent variable, the dependent variable, calories, it's easy to sweep it under the rug. I try not to ascribe intention to these things. Maybe there is intention. I mean, there are incentive structures, but I like to frame it as incentive structures, as why is or isn't something getting talked about without implying an individual person is sinister per se. Mm-hmm. A good example I'll bring up that really I found curious. It was this, I mentioned it to you earlier, the Statins GLP-1 paper. So the two biggest drugs probably in history, or to be the biggest drug is in history, are statins, but definitely one of the biggest, most prescribed drugs. I think 1 in 4 people over 40 are taking it for secondary. Yeah, something like that. So actually that was in the paper. I can share the reference. But so anyway, this paper came out in Cell Metabolism last year. Now, let's be clear. Cell Metabolism...
Now, I go over that report where they changed a lot so that you have more people being recommended to be on statins. Is similar. It's what he's talking. Well, it's one of the things he's talking about when it comes to how many people are on statins. There was another one where it affects GLP production, and they're not reporting. They're not really making a big to-do about it. And he's saying that why do some things get reported, some things don't? Now, we know the answer for that. It's because the industry drives what's being researched. That's the bottom line of what he's saying. He goes into a lot more detail of that in his videos. So check his channel out definitely, but just so you have a reference. But I'll put a link to a shorter version. He goes into really big detail. He geeks out on the science. He goes into a lot of explanation. A lot of people don't really want to watch that, but I do a quicker version going over the article. So I'll link that here in case you're interested.
Metabolism is not a dinky journal. It's a highly regarded scientific journal.
1987.
With lovastatin, yeah.
And this was a human trial where they effectively showed that statins chop GLP-1 levels in humans in half.
Okay, what's GLP?
So GLP-1 is the hormone that drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy try to mimic. So now there's this huge drug market about not exactly biomimicking GLP-1 because they're given at super physiologic doses, that's true. But GLP-1 is a hormone that is depleted in a lot of metabolic health conditions. So, insulin resistance related conditions, diabetes, obesity, PCOS, etc. There tends to be a GLP-1 deficiency. Has to do with inflammation in the gut, decreased GLP-1 production in the gut. So the hormones produced in the gut, it's called incretin hormone, and also just inflammation. Inflammatory cells in the gut have their own GLP-1 receptor, so they'll sop up the GLP-1 and make it more less bioavailable. So long story short, low GLP-1 levels are one of the markers for various metabolic diseases. Right now, we're treating a lot of people with GLP-1 receptor agonists, which are effective for weight loss. And I'm not against these drugs. Let's be clear, I'm not. However,
I think this is another problem, is that you have no idea. And to be fair, this is mainstream medical approach. When it comes to using Ozempic and Wegovy for weight loss, using these drugs, these things are going to have, I'm just making a bet, it's just a bet and it's my opinion, they're going to have such catastrophic health impact on people, like devastating in the future, because you're hijacking your body. And I think that honestly, if you want to know the truth, a lot of people, if they're severely obese and they're going on this, it's like they are probably better off getting gastric bypass, to be honest, because it's a physical, I don't know, it's just a physical mechanical change versus a chemical change that's going to hijack all of your inner, metabolism. It's going to hijack that for years and years, probably, and have very devastating impact to me. I think that that's worse, and that's just an opinion. So I don't think the surgery is advisable either, mainly because it doesn't really work that well, to be honest, in a lot of cases, because if the person does not attack the psychological reasons that they're overeating, and they are overeating to get that big, you have to overeat to get that big, then you're never going to fix it. And so what happens is they just keep overeating, and, even though they have the surgery, their stomach, it just expands, and they overeat, and then they gain the weight again. So if they ever lost it in the first place, sometimes people don't even really lose much weight by doing that. They will at first, but then they won't really make any significant progress. So, as far as that goes, but the Ozempic and the Wegovy, there's not enough known about what it can do. And the thing is, we need to approach these drugs as if it is a drug, and we don't know what it's really going to do to people, especially at these doses and for this purpose, because it existed before as a treatment for diabetes, but it's a different dose. And then so now these doses, this is a completely different animal. And we see a lot of the complications coming from it already. And long term, I think it's going to be horrific. But any of these drugs that we don't know what it's going to do, we shouldn't give them to people unless we know what it's going to do. That is my whole point, is that a lot of these drugs, you don't know. And they do clinical trials, but that's not going to tell you really the true dangers. And then half of the time, even when it does tell you the true dangers, they discount it and they sell the drug anyway. They sell the drug knowing the danger. And that's what people have to understand about the medical industrial complex and big pharma and big food and all of that, is that they don't have our best intent. They don't have our best interest at heart at all. And I think he makes a good point of saying that here. But like him saying, I'm not against Wegovy and Ozempic, in my opinion, you should be. If you're a physician and you don't want to do any harm, you should be against those drugs. honestly, because I think they're going to be a disaster in the future.
Ozempic is a receptor agonist.
For GLP-1, yeah.
Okay.
I find it interesting that there are human data in a prominent journal showing that statins, a very common drug, deplete levels of GLP-1, which is a hormone and related to a blockbuster group of drugs. It cuts the levels in half. Steve, if you can bring up, it was like, it'll be say statin GLP-1 is the image or figure 1H. It's a blue line and a red line. Yeah, that one. So this was from a human trial, a 16-week human trial with, I think it was 20 mgs of atorvastatin versus control, if it's popping up. Those are the results.
Mm-hmm.
The red line's a statin. That's not subtle. It's not subtle at all. And so...
What is the blue line?
The blue line's the control group.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's a placebo-controlled trial. And basically it's showing, statins chop GLP-1 levels in half. And this was also associated with worse glycemic control, so an increase in average blood sugar, HbA1c, increase in insulin, and increase in insulin resistance, which are all kind of known effects.
Mm-hmm.
But what bothers me about this graph is not the effect. I'm not concluding from this, no, you can't take statins, or GLP-1s are, hack. I'm just perturbed that this comes out about a year and a half ago in a major journal, and there is not only no headlines featuring it, which, statins cut GLP-1 levels in human by half, should be a...
The fact that he's shocked by this is, I mean, it's just, I don't know if he's saying this for a point, but if he is really shocked that they didn't care, of course they're not going to do this. This is detrimental to statins. This says something bad about statins, and if it says something bad about statins, it's not going to get any legs, because of course not. Because that's the whole point, is that, they're going to push and positively reinforce anything that makes them trillions of dollars.
Headline. I bet you if you replaced the word statin with steak, that would have been a headline everywhere. Do you agree? So,
or butter.
I think there's selective reporting. And then not only is it not presented in the media, but physicians don't talk about it. After I read this paper the same day, I polled...
Physicians don't talk about anything. If you have the physicians I've gone to, my sampling of physicians, and all the people on Carnivore who are having a lot of problems with their physicians, listening to them, then physicians don't tell you about anything. They don't ever talk about new research to their patients. Why would they do that? I mean, they deem them as being, just too stupid to understand anything. And if you do know something, if you've educated yourself on a lot of these concepts and you talk to them about it, they get offended. A lot of them get pissed off. Not all of them, but a lot of them get really ticked off about it. So that's the environment. This is the landscape that we're having to deal with. So
12 doctors in the area to ask them about this relationship. None of them knew about it. And this was in the Harvard area, presumably some pretty well-educated people who are like, why isn't this even in the realm of awareness? I don't think that physicians are hiding this information from people, but at the end of the day, if you're going to start a medication,
they don't care. Because I'm sorry, but if you don't have to be ignorant. You're ignorant nowadays with all of the information available because you want to be ignorant, or you don't mind being ignorant. And the thing where they're looking at doctors and saying, well, they just don't know. Okay, you should be angry about that. If you are a patient, you should be angry about that. Because the doctor's job is to heal you. I think everybody has forgotten about that. The doctor's job is to heal you. If they're ignorant, they can't do their job. And if they can't do their job, they need to be let go. So that's my take on all of that.
Deserve to have some informed consent.
Right.
This is the kind of thing where it's like, I just think the patient should know in their decision-making process. It doesn't mean don't take either medication. Heck, if it works best for you, take both.
You should at least know what's going on.
This kind of information should be provided to patients, or at least be in the awareness of their physicians. Again, not saying anybody's sinister, but major paper, human...
I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that drug. You see what I mean? I'm not saying this. I'm not saying that. There's a lot of that going on. It's like, why not?
in trial, this is the result. Like, how is this not talked about? Oh, and I'll add, the mechanism they found out, which is quite interesting, is that the statin altered the gut microbiome and altered levels of a bacteria that generates what are called certain secondary bile acids. So primary bile acids can be metabolized by bacteria into secondary bile acids, and these have numerous effects throughout the body. So they get into circulation, they can impact the brain, muscles, fat, and one is called UDCA, and actually can be prescribed as a drug. And what they found in humans, again, is just giving back the UDCA basically reversed the effect.
Interesting.
So what I'm saying here is like, okay, there's a negative effect, and actually there's a solution that has been demonstrated in humans in a major journal. So you could use this in your patient population to improve care, maybe attenuate some of the negative effects of statins on GLP-1 and insulin resistance. But because we don't focus on metabolism and physiology, this gets entirely ignored. And that's just one small example about how I think dysfunctional norms and incentive structures lead to worse care. Again,
there's a broader context here that I think we should talk about. You mentioned this in the beginning with your Oreo experiment, but I'm not sure everyone knows the whole story. The
Oreo experiment, in case you don't know, you need to check out his channel where he did high level. This is very high level. He showed that what you eat has a great impact on your LDL cholesterol. So he tried eating Oreos for a certain amount of time, carbs, junky carbs, and showed that when he did that, he lowered his, and then he took statins. He'd had a washout period. He took statins, and he showed that the statins were not as effective as the Oreos. No joke. So if you don't know about the Oreo cookie experiment, I'll link that in the description below too, because you need to see that.
LDL went up quite high when you went keto. This is part of
That happened to me too, yeah.
Right. This is part of common, not always, but commonly in human physiology. It happened to me a lot when I was strict carnivore.
Lean
I
mass
just
hyper
interrupt you
responders.
for a sec. I was listening to your pod with Gary Brecka this morning, and you said your LDL was 125, right? And
Now.
he's like, oh, that's high. And you're like, yeah, that's high. You know what mine is?
Mine's like 250.
Well, mine was as high as 500.
Whoa.
574.
Yeah. So
This is my last.
in the setting of
I'm not, but to be clear, I'm not saying this is fine for all people.
We're
I'm
dick
just
measuring our LDL levels.
We can talk about it later. It's now open information.
Yeah.
Actually, it was Mark Hyman and Andrew Huberman was talking about my cholesterol and what his pods. I'm like, all right, this is how you introduced me to the world.
Yeah.
But my cholesterol, we can talk about it. There's more nuance there. I'm not, well, let me stop interrupting you. We'll go back to it. Go ahead.
It's just interesting because in this context, and Nick has done a lot of research here, which is really interesting, and we should talk about it later in the podcast. I think we've all experienced this sort of lean mass hyperresponder phenotype, and basically the idea, as I see it, and Nick can add context to this as he sees fit, is that in some individuals, particularly individuals who are lean and fit, when you move over to fat-based metabolism in a ketogenic type context, there are more energy moving molecules in the blood, and that LDL actually moves triglycerides and cholesterol. And so it's not uncommon in human physiology to see LDL go up as a physiologic, perhaps not pathologic response in a ketogenic diet. Whether or not this represents an increase in cardiovascular disease risk is the main question.
Right.
And the central question here, which is something that I'm thinking of as you're describing this paper and the response to it, or lack of response to it in the general sort of media space, is that Apo B and LDL, Apo B containing lipoproteins that's a broader term for LDL and other lipoproteins, which are broadly felt to be atherogenic. These are sacrosanct in Western medicine, and anything that challenges that hypothesis, this lipid hypothesis, is just disregarded or is not felt to be valid and is kind of cast out to the side. So
That is true. Like, you don't touch that with a 10-foot pole. You cannot touch that with a 10-foot pole. So all of the things that were born of Ansel Keys, that were in the beginning, there were Ansel Keys getting money from the sugar industry back in the 70s. And he did his study, which was fraudulent because he left data out. He cherry-picked data on his 7-country study, which was really a 22-country study. He left data out, made it look like cholesterol was the villain. And I will tell you, and then that started the whole thing. And he did it. He got money from the sugar industry to do it. So that was the fraudulent research that started the vilification of cholesterol. And one thing I'm going to say that I want to make abundantly clear is that just like in politics, and unfortunately medicine is just like politics in modern era, Just like politics, you have to have a villain. It doesn't mean the villain is real. It doesn't mean that that there's reasons, there's legitimate reasons to have a villain. There's no, it doesn't matter. That makes no difference. Reality and facts make no difference. There must be a villain. A villain has to exist in order to facilitate war and facilitate conflict and making weapons and things like that. The economy depends on a villain in a lot of cases. So just like in politics, where you must have a villain in order to actually make the money that they did. I mean, if you look at the food industry on fat-free, margarine, seed oil, all of these things that were glorified because of the vilification of cholesterol, they had to have a villain in order to make this other thing, in the sugar industry, profit. So that is the way the world works. And it might sound cynical, but it is the way the world works. So I just wanted to add that in there. And that was how long ago? And how much have we seen? So how much have we witnessed and experienced and seen about inflammatory seed oils? I mean, there are things that cause inflammation. You can measure that. You can feed somebody a thing and say, here, you've got this thing, you do that, you become inflamed. That means it shouldn't go in your mouth, okay? And first of all, seed oils are not even food. They were industrial lubricants. They shouldn't have gone in our mouth. We should stick to food, things that are food, not things that are not food. So and that's my basis on seed oil. People are like, oh, the research is blah, 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 blah. Or there's only this much research or that much. I don't care how much research it is. I don't know how much research there is on me drinking, motor oil, but I'm not going to do it because it's not food, right? I'm not going to drink things or eat things that were never food. And those weren't food. Those were industrial lubricants.
It's quite interesting because that's a very central theme. If we'll talk about seed oils in this podcast, and it comes back to that same idea in many ways. Apo B I see as like a linchpin in Western medicine, and having my LDL go up super high, and then having it, I had a similar response to Nick's. I mean, I eat carbohydrates now. I don't eat carbs. When you mentioned that you
like fruit,
I eat fruit and honey,
right,
and milk. So milk has lactose, but
you're not eating bowls of cereal.
I don't eat bowls of cereal or rice or oats or pasta. And there's different responses to different grains, perhaps based on their processing. So, and processed carbohydrates, processed sugars probably react differently in the human gut than fruits and fruit juice. But so I include carbohydrates in my diet now. I found for myself after a year and a half of long-term strict carnivore, so meat and organs and fat, that my eczema got better, but my electrolytes did not stay within normal limits.
Right.
It turns out that there is a need for insulin signaling at the level of the kidney to resorb certain electrolyte molecules.
Yes.
And that a lot of people, not everyone, some people probably do better with long-term strict keto than others. I had massive electrolyte imbalances that were resolved when I added carbohydrates back. My immune...
Now, this is interesting, and there's a lot of people who gave him a lot of hate because he was carnivore. Now, I don't think he demonizes people on strict carnivore diet. Like, he just says for him, as far as I know, and again, you guys might follow him more closely. I just kind of see him periodically. But as far as I know, he wasn't feeling as good. He was doing strict carnivore, and so he had to adjust, and he added some of the fruit and some of the honey or whatever. I know that Dr. Berry calls honey bee vomit, which is freaking hilarious. But, he added that, and that seems to be working for him. Now, keep in mind that every human being is its own little micro-universe. While we're all humans, we all have to have meat. We all have to have animal food. Animal food. That sounds stupid. We have to have animal products, all right? Because the B12, and we need the nutrients in them to be healthy. How you have to adjust it for your life is going to be different from another person's possibly. There's some people who, for whatever reason, they eat, and a lot of this is, I think it's a play on words. Like, people will say high fat carnivore. Okay. What does that mean exactly? Like, how much fat? Like, because you can go off the deep end with the fat. I mean, you really can't. Like, I literally could take a bath in butter every day. I love butter. I absolutely adore butter. And I could just drench everything in butter, and I could drink the stuff almost, if it's melted. So but I mean, there's a limit to what your body, can tolerate. And usually it's going to send you to the bathroom way before, when it starts to get over the top. But like I said, you can overeat anything. They are eating higher fat carnivore, but they're not eating as high a fat carnivore as, say, other people, because people are different in what they can tolerate. If I did the fruit thing at this point, like, I've never tried it, so I can't say that I've experimented. I think, I've done mainly fruit and then other stuff, and I found that it didn't make me feel as good. I don't feel as good if I'm not producing as many ketones. I have found that is the ideal for me, is when I'm staying in a state of ketosis. Now, if you eat fruit and honey, you will not be in ketosis. That'll wreck it. So that for me is like the deciding factor as to what I would try. Now, in the future, I might try different things. I don't know. Because, all I know about is the now, in the past 3 years, what's made me feel the best. So I definitely know that I don't want to be keto, because I don't want even clean keto, because I'm not really interested in consuming fiber, and then that goes back to the fruit thing. You're dealing with a lot of fiber, and fiber to me is problematic, always has been. So, but anyway, that's just my take on it.
Conditions did not come back with the addition of fruit and squash and honey. But I know that for me, if I include things like tomato, for instance, which is technically a fruit, but within this nightshade family, that I will get a recurrence of eczema. So some things...
Interesting.
This is what's interesting, and what I've kind of seen over the years is that for people who have autoimmune conditions, inflammatory bowel diseases, eczema, skin conditions, psoriasis, there are some foods that are widely considered to be healthy that can be triggers for some people. And that's just that's something that I was never taught in medical school. And it's probably not something that everyone needs to worry about. But if people have unresolved autoimmune conditions, it's something to be aware of. More broadly, I think the LDL conversation is that in Nick's case, and again, I'll let him add context here if I'm leaving anything out. And in my case also, strict keto leads to a lean mass hyperresponder, quote, rise in LDL. We can talk about cardiovascular implications for that later in the podcast, but the addition of carbohydrates, whether it's fruit and honey and squash or Oreos, then changes your physiology. You're no longer in ketosis, and the LDL can come down. So that just so people understand that's probably what happened to Nick with his Oreos in the beginning, which is this really sort of viral illustration of the fact that you can lower LDL just by changing your macronutrient ratios. And
that's the key. Okay. No doctor's going to tell you that. In fact, my doctor told me a lie to my face when years ago, when I was talking about cholesterol, my cholesterol was kind of high or whatever. She wanted to put me on a statin, and I was like, well, what can you do with diet? And she basically said essentially nothing. That's a lie. That's an absolute lie. Your profile changes when you go carnivore, and this is for most carnivores, not all, because like I said, micro-universe. But for most carnivores, a lot of times what the pattern is that you'll have a lot of people have higher LDL, not all, but higher LDL, a higher HDL, which is positive in all spheres of, medicine. Doesn't matter where, it's like if you're a carnivore space, that's good to have higher HDL. And then if you're in mainstream medicine, that's supposedly good if you have higher HDL. So you have higher HDL and you have a lower triglyceride. It is also accepted fact that lower triglycerides are better. So lower triglycerides. So, and all of that has to do with what you put in your mouth. All of this has to do with what you put in your mouth. Just like the Oreos made a difference, so does the food that we eat. My doctor lied to my face. That is malpractice. That is you being ignorant. That is you telling me something that is a lie. I don't care it's because you're ignorant. Like, you're harming patients if you don't know what you're talking about, and they do not know what they're talking about in a lot of cases. And this is not just her. This was a lot of other doctors that I've actually encountered in the past.
Bigger point that I just wanted to add here is that I see so many of these health discussions revolve around Apo B containing lipoproteins and LDL, and that's often where they get stuck, because a lot of people that I've experienced the stories of, they get healthier, right? They make changes. They do meat plus fruit and squash, or they do strict meat, or they do keto. Their autoimmune condition resolves. They feel better, less brain fog, better libido, fertility, and they go to their doctor, and the doctor says, "Oh, your LDL is sky high. You have
that's exactly what happened to me.
Whatever you're doing, stop it now." And you say, "But wait, I just told you that I feel the best I ever have in my life." So this Apo B sort of linchpin is really critical to unpack, and what we know in don't know, and what's been assumed about it is really interesting because
Can I just jump in?
And that's a very, very good point. And I like the way that he put this, all of this.
I want to say, because it's interesting what you said about electrolytes, because the first time I ever did keto was under the guidance of Dom D'Agostino. He was the one who kind of coached me.
Now, I'm going to add something here about electrolytes. I was wondering about that when I first went carnivore, and they're like, but you have to drink electrolyte, because you'll become depleted. And there's a mechanism for that. But I'm like, well, what did we used to drink? You think about like the ancient times or whatever. And the funniest thing that Dr. Berry says is he goes, well, we used to drink puddle water. And you think about somebody like drinking out of a mud puddle. It's kind of funny, but it's true that like, now when we drink water, it's like purified and it's just water and there's usually nothing in it. Like we're not getting minerals and things. And we know that we need minerals. We've established that a long time ago. We need certain trace minerals and we need enough salt and everything.
And introduced me to everything. And what I noticed was after the first few weeks of doing it, I would, on a podcast, I would notice I'm like falling asleep an hour into it. Like I had no energy. Like I just couldn't, I couldn't do it. And he was brought up to me. He's like, how much water and electrolytes are you drinking? I'm like, none. He's like, that's why. He's like, you just start pounding electrolytes. And I started doing that and it like changed the game. I was like, felt way better. Like it was total night and day. So it's interesting. It's interesting that like I would have never known if it wasn't for Dom that you had to get more electrolytes and more salt in your system.
And this goes back to people not understanding what we need for fuel. What does our fuel look like? What is our fuel composed of on a daily basis? What do we have to have? What do we have to have? What do we don't? What do we not have to have? That's important to understand all these things.
Drink way more water if you're not eating carbs.
I just want to double click on something that Paul said. I don't know why I said Tom. About this LDL and Apo B boogeyman, because I want to be very careful and say
you got to have a boogeyman. That
I'm not condoning that my LDL is safe generally. In fact, in most people, it's probably not. But there's the curiosity that gets piqued or should be piqued when you have a patient who has normal LDL and then their LDL quintuples with a dietary shift. Like this doesn't happen. This is not known to happen. In fact, familial hypercholesterolemia, which you can tell it's a genetic disease, familial inherited,
right,
is now, I believe, diagnosed based on just like a threshold blood lipid level. So an LDL above 190, they just assume it's genetic and familial.
Yes, so this is something I want to talk about because that was put on my record. And that is a genetic disease, obviously, like he's saying, and that's a test that they can do to determine if it's really that versus something else. And they don't do the test. All they do is look at a higher LDL and they immediately diagnose you with that. That's wrong. Like that doesn't make any sense at all. Like that makes no sense at all, especially since we know that diet can actually change these values.
And you can get diagnosed with FH and then treatments ensue. Anyway, point being, isn't it interesting, just intellectually, that I and other people like me can manipulate our LDL levels fivefold with dietary shifts, more than standard of care treatment, multi-billion, maybe trillion-dollar drug industry.
Right.
And I said earlier that I think the Oreo versus statin had a positive impact. I think it had a positive scientific impact. Actually, we've gotten funding to do more trials because of this, more partnerships, but even clinically, because it got the word out there. And in the weeks and months, and now more than a year following that experiment, I have heard from dozens, if not hundreds, of clinicians and cardiologists who are like, oh, shit, I have these patients. And I didn't know what they were until now. That paper ended up, the Oreo versus statin paper was like very widely circulated. I think it had 15 times the media attention score of your average New England Journal paper, which is the highest impact factor.
Great marketing stunt.
It was a marketing stunt, but to get a word out there, and what the clinicians saw was now this new phenotype and this new reason for a patient presentation that they didn't understand before. And what did that allow them to do? Act on the physiology. So even before the Oreo versus statin, we had worked with clinics where they had patients who had this phenotype but didn't need to be in therapeutic ketosis, so they just titrated back in carbs. And you can use a sweet potato. One patient, like about a sweet potato worth of carbs addition per day, lowered his LDL by 480. No medication can do that. So the point being is this
and that's never going to be something that they're going to recommend. I mean, I don't believe in this current system, like they would never start saying, well, we're going to, recommend those sweet potatoes for you. They're not going to do that.
I put no value judgment on LDL or statins in this. This was about interesting physiology that can actually serve people, because if you can eat a sweet potato and get a more potent effect than taking a drug for the rest of your life, a drug that does that,
right,
cuts your GLP-1 in half, like that is better patient care. So we need to understand the physiology of metabolism in order to advance care. And the fact that the field is so myopically focused on like a single marker, in this case LDL or Apo B, that is the problem.
Yep.
And so it's not that doesn't matter. In fact, it's not even that that's not, quote, causal. We might want to debate whether or not Apo B is causal, but it's that without further context, you are not serving people. So we'll go through a few studies. One that's been debated recently is a Minnesota coronary experiment. And the reason I bring that up is I was rereading it yesterday. It was a paper by Ramsden et al. Originally, this study was done decades ago, a long-term randomized controlled trial. But it was on like seed oils, and actually not a seed, corn oil versus a higher saturated fat diet. It turns out the spoiler alert, the corn oil diet ended up doing quite poorly. But the conclusions, if you actually read the paper, weren't that omega-6 is terrible, saturated fat is good. No, the researchers just said things like there are different physiological reasons for LDL to change. This matters. This context matters. And I think like the final lines of the paper, Steve, can you bring up, there's like a Minnesota end quote? We can actually get into the study. It's the third one down in the top left.
Now, you were talking about titrating in carbs to a keto diet.
Yeah, I just want to quickly read this quote because I think it's really important to frame our whole discussion and like, the angle I'm trying to take. This is what the paper ended on. Given the limitations of the current evidence, the best approach might be one of humility, highlighting limitations of current knowledge and setting a high bar for advising intakes beyond what we can provide for natural diets. So I'll just frame up right now. We may end up debating this, but like, I'm not against omega-6. I don't think walnuts are terrible, but I think by the same token, like butter, saturated fat rich whole foods are probably also very healthful. I was doodling out, how I think about this. Can you bring up, Steve, seed oil map complex? It's in the top left. That's a simple one. The one above it.
The one above that.
The one above it. So I was drawing this doodle on the way to the airport about the way I think about seed oils.
Nerd. I just gotta say, he's one of my favorite nerds, but
we might end up touching on a lot of this. People don't need to understand it. The point I want to make right now is I doodle out that and come to the conclusion, wow, there's so much we don't know about this. And I think one thing I want to do, this has been a long preamble to get to the seed oil topic, but my mission, I guess, is not to say good or bad, but to wrap context around this and give people like an awe and humility for how interesting and complex the biology is.
It is. And he's basically saying that the mainstream essentially like tries to boil it down to the simple good, bad, evil, whatever, and demonizing things or just when they don't know. Because
right now we just hear clickbait taglines and people are very attracted to simplicity. But I really feel that there is a growing community of people who like hunger for nuance and respond to it. So that little doodle can be a framework we come back to, but I've been on my soapbox for too long. I'll pass it back to you.
Nuance doesn't get views. That's the problem.
But it can. I think if you can be provocatively reasonable.
Yes.
That's what I try
agree.
to play with. That's why I'm even like playing with social media in the first place is like, oh yeah, you need an engagement tactic. Harvard scientist eats Oreo cookies, great clickbait.
Yeah.
But does the clickbait, is it then followed by something with depth? So you do need to pay homage to the clickbait gods or whatever. But that doesn't mean you can't use that as a tool to really advance conversations and research.
Totally agree with you.
I just challenge people to really hear the words that are going to be coming out of our mouths and the rest of this conversation.
So before we get to seed oils, I want to ask though.
Yeah, and you don't partition yourselves into camps. Like, you know, eating food shouldn't result in being in a cult, you know. Now, while at the same time, carnivores do have to defend ourselves because we are told we're going to die. It's not mainstream. It's demonized. We're looked at like we're nuts and things like that. So, I mean, you stand up for yourself. You don't let people just talk crap, you know. It's like, especially, you know, if people at work, like, get kind of funny and want to call me names, it's like you're going to listen, you're going to hear an earful if you actually come at me, you know. So they don't do that anymore. I wonder why.
Is LDL bad? If you have high LDL, is that bad?
See, Nick sort of
the guy asking that question right after he just went into all of that, basically saying, he said, I can't say that it is. Like, is it or is it not? Like, he just basically asked, like, the question that he was saying, you really can't do good, bad, essentially. You know what I mean? It's not that simple. It's nuanced.
Shadowed this. My perspective, Nick can add if he feels differently, is that it's contextual, right? And this is a really, really important question. It's a really important question. As Nick has suggested, the statin industry is potentially $1 trillion industry. There are a lot of financial zeros on the line here if LDL is not all it seems. The mainstream medical perspective is that LDL and Apo B containing lipoproteins are atherogenic. They are bad. They directly cause atherosclerosis.
Yes.
I don't agree with that based on what I've seen. I think it's much more nuanced and contextual. Broadly, when I look at the evidence with Apo B and LDL, we can just use one of those terms moving forward. In humans who demonstrate markers suggestive of insulin sensitivity, metabolic health, there is a different effect, cardiovascular sort of correlate for LDL levels than there is in people who are metabolically unwell.
And that's a good point, because why would we look at one single thing? Why would we say one single thing is bad when you have a symphony of metabolic pathways going on? You have a symphony of different things, and you have to look at everything together. You know, so that's a very good way of putting that too. If
you are a diabetic and you have a high LDL, that does seem to consistently represent a significantly increased risk of cardiovascular disease. In some cases, 4 to 6x, right?
Wow.
A low LDL. If you are metabolically healthy, which is something that we can really only...
But the point when he's saying if you are a diabetic, well, it sounds to me like the scenario when you're diabetic and you have all this metabolic dysfunction, that what he's saying is that condition can also cause heart disease. That makes more sense than that LDL level causes heart disease, which doesn't even, I mean, that doesn't even make any sense. Like, if you look at it in context, it's like this. You're metabolically ill, and this metabolic illness is not only going to cause you to get your foot chopped off or, you know, go blind and all the things we relate to diabetes, but it also will cause heart problems, you know, and circulatory problems and things. So that's the way it needs to be phrased, not, oh, this one value. That doesn't even make any sense, you know, of all the things that you can test in the human body.
Chief proxies for whether it's an HDL or, unfortunately, very few studies are done with fasting insulin. I think if studies were done with fasting insulin, that's probably the best marker.
Fasting insulin.
That's an easily obtainable blood marker. I'm actually not familiar with a single study that's done with fasting insulin, but if you look at things that approximate insulin, or you use that as sort of a third variable, anything that approximates insulin sensitivity, you see a markedly attenuated relationship between LDL levels and increased cardiovascular risk. And so I think that there's a question, to me, if something is causal, you get into this sort of semantics of what is causality, right? Is something consistently associated with a process enough to claim causality? I have my brain is simple in this respect. I think if something causes it, then LDL must be enough to initiate atherosclerosis on its own. And if you're saying LDL causes atherosclerosis, the associated inference is that more LDL is always bad. And that's really the relevant clinical question is if you, Danny, go and eat a ketogenic diet and your LDL goes up, does that represent an increased risk of cardiovascular disease for you? Is that something we need to be aware of? Or if you become more metabolically healthy because you're getting rid of garbage foods, if you're getting rid of, quote, carbs, right?
Yeah.
And you become more metabolically healthy with a higher LDL,
Right.
is it possible that your cardiovascular risk is the same or lower? Now, so this is where the nuance comes in. I think it's very contextual. And like I said, if you stratify the relationship between LDL and cardiovascular disease, there's a marked attenuation when people are insulin sensitive
Interesting.
versus insulin resistant. So,
And the best way to determine whether or not you're getting the LDL is really affecting you is to get the CT angiograms, where they can they basically put you inside of a CT scan with dye in your arteries and see how much plaque you have.
probably the best imaging, that
Yeah.
you could do is a CT angio. I mean, there's something called a CAC, but it's not
Right.
not the same
The only
test.
problem with the CT angio is you got to go in that freaking cancer machine. They radiate.
It's a lot of radiation.
Right.
Yeah, you don't want to do it.
Above age
every
40, a CAC is pretty good in terms of, let's say, a warranty on your heart.
I got a CAC and it said it was 0.
Yeah.
But I also, I think it might have been Dom who told me this, that his parents got a CAC and it was 0. And then they also went and got a CT angio right after, and it said they had I don't know if it might have been somebody else. And they said that the CT angio, they had a high amount of plaque, but their CAC score was still 0.
Yeah.
Depends what algorithm they use to interpret
Right.
the
Well,
CT
right.
angio.
You're getting dangerously close to things that I'm not supposed to talk about
I can
until
talk,
Friday.
I
but
can talk about
we
it.
can talk about what you know. A couple things I want to poke at. We can come back to the CAT thing later. I actually want to put on my Jade Tower academic prude hat for a minute for a purpose.
Ivory Tower.
Ivory Tower Harvard prude hat. So, Paul, you effectively said Apo B is not causal. And you've said that, right?
I don't believe Apo B is cause. I don't believe there's enough evidence to suggest that Apo B is causal.
Okay.
Which means what again?
So
Necessary but not sufficient.
It's okay.
But the way you described it seemed like you were talking about. So let me unpack these terms. Causal definitionally, and this is important. Definitionally means it is necessary and part of the causal cascade, effectively.
And when you say Apo B, you mean LDL.
So we should probably define these.
Yes.
Apo B is stands for apolipoprotein B.
Yes.
It is an apolipoprotein on LDL particles. So there are more particles than just LDL.
It's a proxy of LDL.
It's a proxy of an LDL particle count. So it's a better marker for LDL, whereas
There's a cat howling. I can't really stop it. There's always something. It's like a clown car thing going on in there. I don't know, but I'm sorry. I apologize if you can hear it.
standard LDL cholesterol is the cholesterol fraction generally calculated
Got it.
in all the LDL specific type Apo B containing lipoproteins. If that doesn't make sense, they're proxies for one another as far as we're concerned. If there's a divergence, we will highlight it.
Okay, and Paul is saying that it's not causal.
Right. And
Okay.
and then he's trying to redefine what you mean by causal. And the reason I bring this up is because in these discussions, that little chink in the armor is all you need, and you know this, for conventional academics to write you off and leverage that within academia to say this person doesn't know what he's talking about. Let's go through the evidence proving LDL is causal or Apo B is causal. So again, it's interesting social dynamics. My position on Apo B is it's causal insofar as it's necessary, but I agree with Paul, context. So to think about this graphically, if you imagine a simple X-Y axis, and on the Y-axis is the amount of plaque you're accumulating in your heart. The X-axis is your exposure to Apo B. And let's say that there is a positive relationship. Is it a really steep line? Or is it super, super shallow? Mm-hmm. And if it's super, super shallow, because say you have a positive hormonal and metabolic milieu, then that needs to be weighted when making decisions about what intervention you start or don't, or stay on or don't. So, if your absolute risk increase from having high Apo B is actually quite low on an individual basis, and there's ways we can figure this out, that's different than I have already had a heart attack and I have metabolic syndrome and I eat a standard American diet and my Apo B and LDL are through the roof. Those are two very different things.
Yes.
And the failure to wrap context around this individual marker, that's the issue. The issue is not that the marker doesn't have any value in and of itself. That's more or less my position. And it's also why I'm very comfortable giving, recommendations, advice on like ways to lower your Apo B if that's desired, while myself living with crazy high LDL. A pattern that arises in my social media that I think confuses people is I'll often talk about things in a positive light that I don't adopt myself. So for example, particular fibers I think can be very beneficial. I eat basically a zero fiber diet because of my context, because of my history of IBD, how it affects me personally. And what works for me shouldn't generalize to another person.
Do you eat any fruit at all, like Paul does, or any carbs at all?
No. And but I will add, were I not to need a ketogenic diet therapeutically for my IBD, I would happily eat a sweet potato or some fruit. I by no means think those are bad things. And guess what? It would lower my LDL and Apo B substantially, which isolated probably would, all things being equal, be more likely to lower my risk specifically for CVD than other things.
So you eat zero carbs?
Basically. I'm always in ketosis.
Carbohydrates.
Carbohydrates.
Because that word carbs is kind of like a colloquialism, right? People hear carbs, they think like pasta, bread, right?
Yeah.
So carbohydrates, I don't think you eat any carbohydrates because you definitely don't eat any carbs.
Yeah. Right. I'll have a little bit, but nothing that will keep me out of ketosis for a prolonged
What do you
period of
typically eat throughout the day?
Now, probably, so I eat 2 meals a day, probably in like in a 6 to 7 hour window. So
breakfast and dinner?
Yeah, breakfast and dinner, like 11 a.m., noon, I'll have a meal. Probably eggs, cheese, salmon, olive oil, maybe some macadamia nuts, and then dinner can be fish, chicken, steak. I'm pretty simple.
No sides, just the meat.
Pretty much.
Wow.
Pretty much. And the thing is, I like these foods. Like, if I could, without GI upset or any consequences, have like a big dish of like Brussels sprouts with like dried cranberries and walnuts, that sounds delicious. And I think for a lot of people, it could be healthy. But no, it's not worth it for me. It makes me feel unwell.
I understand. Yeah.
And there's a lot of individual context, and so seed oils is another good example. Well, actually.
And why do you? So there's like a lot of people don't like to eat breakfast. I think breakfast is bad.
I mean, breakfast is fine.
You skip lunch.
Well, when I say breakfast, I mean when I break my fast. So 11, 12.
Okay, so this is another thing that I think is wrong is people like, breakfast is bad, lunch is good, lunch is bad. We're supposed to eat as humans when we're hungry. If you eat a satiating diet like carnivore, you're not going to be hungry 3 times a day. If you are, I mean, I won't say that nobody can. Like some of these people that are bodybuilders and they just need a whole lot of energy. I mean, maybe, but the average person that leaves the standard American diet, if you're eating that much, you're overeating most likely. But you're not. All you have to do, you don't even have to worry about it or how many times to eat and all this kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about it. Your body, if it's working correctly, will tell you you're hungry, get some food, and you'll eat. And then you don't eat when you're not hungry. But it's very hard in the beginning to teach yourself what hunger is. My kids don't know what that means. They get crashes and cravings, and they think cravings are hunger. That's not hunger. That's a metabolic response to carbohydrate ingestion. So it's like, or a lot of carbohydrates, especially fast foods and junky carbs and trash, processed food. Like you'll have a surge of energy and then you'll have a crash and then you'll start craving again. So just saying, that's another thing that this whole breakfast, because this guy that's interviewing him is he's not like a scientific guy. This is kind of a culture war type podcast, it looks like. So it's interesting to have him asking these questions.
Okay, gotcha.
So yeah. Okay. Lunch, dinner, if you want to say it.
I heard that the metabolism is working way harder in the morning, so it's better to eat in the morning, and it slows down at high noon.
I think that's kind of a fairy tale. What do you think?
I don't know if there's any evidence for that.
That's the Jack Cruz Kool-Aid I've been drinking, bro. Come on, don't break my heart.
Can we go back to the lipid stuff? This is super interesting to me. I don't want to miss this point. I wanted to piggyback on something Nick was saying. The reason I think the conversation is so important is because it goes back to what we were talking about earlier in Western medicine. as a doctor, when a patient comes to see you, when someone is sick, it's important to try and understand what is actually at the root cause of their problem. Western medicine really points the finger at LDL. They have blockbuster drugs that lower LDL, and they want to make LDL causal. I agree with Nick. LDL, Apo B containing lipoproteins, which include LDL, are necessary for atherosclerosis. If you do animal model knockout studies of Apo B, they don't get atherosclerosis. But I don't think that's just, maybe I'm incorrectly defining the word causal. It's just sort of, maybe we're doing hand waving here. I think that's not what I mean when I say causal. I think of causal as direct relationship, right? So if your LDL goes up, your cardiovascular risk always goes up because if something causes atherosclerosis. LDL, you're sort of inferring that LDL or Apo
Will
B
does smoking
containing...
cause lung cancer?
Well, can I get to that?
Yeah.
The if your Apo B goes up, you're sort of inferring that LDL is directly damaging de novo to the endothelium or something. And I think that what Nick is saying, and I agree with this, is that it's all about context. That if the context is different, right? If someone is metabolically healthy versus not, that Apo B carries various risks. When I look at that equation, I think that what we should be focusing on is metabolic health, and not ignoring LDL, but all of our myopic focus is on LDL. Never in all of my training, medical school, residency, even medicine rotations, surgery rotations, did anyone ask me to get a fasting insulin to assay someone's metabolic health. Within Western medicine, I think one of the greatest tragedies or greatest oversights is that physicians are not taught to think about metabolic health as the foundation upon which diseases manifest. And so if we're looking at metabolic health as the context in which we should interpret LDL and Apo B, why are we not assaying people's metabolic health? When people tell me about their stories, when I was working with patients previously, they would come to me with lipid panels and say, my doctor is concerned about my LDL. And I would say, what's your fasting insulin? And they would invariably say they didn't get one. There are ways to look at a traditional lipid panel that give you a sense of your metabolic health. Triglyceride to HDL ratio is perhaps the most predictive, because those are changed in sort of metabolic dyslipidemia. But again, physicians don't do that. They myopically focus on LDL, Apo B containing lipoproteins. So we're forsaking patients by not appreciating the metabolic health. I would argue that it is insulin resistance, also known as metabolic dysfunction, that is the initiating event. That is the determining factor in atherosclerosis. So why are we not looking to treat that? Not necessarily with drugs. Let's ask the questions around what causes metabolic dysfunction in diet and lifestyle. That's where we need to go. That, for my money, that's where the return is, right? That's the $64,000 question that very few in Western medicine are asking, and none in the traditional medicine world are being taught to ask, right? What causes metabolic dysfunction? I think most people would agree. Metabolic dysfunction, synonymous with insulin resistance, is at the root of so many chronic diseases. That is reversible. Nick and I have...
Yeah, and that's very important. And again, a very based approach. I'm really surprised with Saladino's approach on this, because I like the bluntness of it all.
I've seen that myriad times. You can reverse metabolic dysfunction. So why are we not thinking about that first? And if that determines the context in which your LDL levels should be interpreted, why is that not the first thing we're thinking of? And if the context of LDL determines its cardiovascular risk, then LDL is not really, doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense to me in terms of linguistics for it to be causal. Yes, it's necessary, not causal. That's how I think about it. Again, we can get into like this splitting hairs. What does the word causal mean? But I think that this is a clarion call that we need to do a much better job in Western medicine, understanding someone's baseline metabolic health, how to get there, and how to get back there, and what makes us less metabolically. That's the most interesting question to me.
I just want to finish the conversation and thought around semantics. I don't want to beat a dead horse on this, but just from my position, I think causal and most important gets confused. So like insulin sensitivity, metabolic health, I think it's most important.
Agreed.
I still think Apo B is, quote, causal, but that doesn't mean it's most important. It's the same with terms like evidence-based, quote unquote, and, best medicine. Evidence-based medicine is not necessarily the best medicine. So these are things that people get caught in these buzzwords without thinking, what do they really mean? So like for evidence-based medicine, it's like, well, have we checked the boxes on this type of intervention? Not actually, does the intervention help the individual patient or the most people? Actually, there was a Nature letter in 2015 by Nicholas something I was reading the other day. Is I think the top 10 highest grossing drugs help between 1 in 4 and 1 in 25 people who take them. Now, the reason that's important is because you can run a double-blind, multi-million-dollar RCT, get statistically significant results, and like sell a product, and it can still not help most people. But what we do, and this is how medicine is built right now, is like we take a heterogeneous group of people.
And people will keep taking it. That's the sad part, is a lot of people will keep taking whatever they're told to take, even if it's not effective. And the doctor won't change that. You know, sometimes they do, but a lot of times they put them on it like, well, that's what you got to take, even though it's not even effective. So that's a sad state of doctor worship.
And do what's considered a, quote, gold standard, and then prescribe the outcome to everyone without looking at the individual context.
Right.
So the theme that keeps coming up is context, context, context. Now, I will hit Lp(a) quickly, but I then want to...
This is like with the Human Genome Project was doing this thing where they basically take people's DNA and they come up with like custom tailored treatments for them. Like if you have a cancer or whatever, they take your DNA and they like figure out the exact type of drug or therapy to like target exactly what's in their body dependent on their biology. It's like a custom.
The degree to which we're getting more resolution on not just the genome, but the and on multi-omics. So multi-omics like transcriptome, proteome, genome, microbiome. Actually, forgive me, one more quick tangent, but this is super cool. One of my favorite labs is the Snyder Lab at Stanford, who are like kings at multi-omics. They had a paper last year in Nature Biomedical Engineering. How many types of type 2 diabetes are there, Paul?
How many types of type 2 diabetes?
Yeah.
Are we back to linguistics?
It's a read my mind question 4. So what they did in this study, basically, I'll try to make this short, but they did gold standard, in lab testing on a cohort of patients, and kind of dissected what was the main cause of type 2 diabetes, so insulin resistance, generally adult onset, obesity, in these patients. Because there's different pathophysiologies, again, context, nuance. So you could have incretin dysfunction, liver dysfunction, muscle dysfunction, beta cell dysfunction at your pancreas. Now, the way we diagnose type 2 diabetes is like, what is your average blood sugar? How do you respond after 2 hours on a glucose tolerance test? What they did in the study is basically show each patient individually had a dominant, one of those 4 that was driving type 2 diabetes, or 2 co-dominant. And then, and this is what was cool, you can't do this kind of those kind of lab tests clinically on patients, but they use machine learning and AI to then take the patients, put CGMs on them, and then the CGMs were able to decode from the shape of the CGM curve what the specific underlying pathology was driving type 2 diabetes in that individual patient.
Oh, wow.
So as we evolve with AI, machine learning, biomonitoring tools, and the reason I'm going on this tangent is I think, and I want to see if Paul agrees, we are going to see a transformation in how medicine is practiced, moving away from, quote, gold standards RCTs, which use heterogeneous groups of people, moving towards personalized medicine focused on physiology like that. Because now we're getting the tools to measure these things and act on them. And quickly on Lp(a), because it's a fascinating story, I'm personally more concerned about it, I'll just give my high-level opinion, than LDL particles. But there's some really interesting work, if people want to go down a rabbit hole. I wrote a newsletter and did a video on it that I can share with you, so I don't go on too long right now, but about Lp(a) as basically a wound-healing surrogate, evolutionarily, for vitamin C. You know about this Pauling work?
A little bit.
So yeah, Linus Pauling, who smart guy, 2 Nobel Prizes. In the 90s, him and his colleague, Dr. Rath, developed this idea that Lp(a) arose as a replacement for vitamin C. So most mammals can synthesize vitamin C, humans can't. And a few other animals can't, like the European hedgehog. And basically, vitamin C has wound-healing properties. Lp(a) also has wound-healing properties. So if you get a cut, you want to like heal up quickly, evolutionarily, scar, don't bleed to death, yada, yada, yada. First, the evolutionary pattern is fascinating because Lp(a) like arose independently in those organisms that lost the ability to synthesize vitamin C. And there's a lot of overlap. And the reason I bring this up is because some people think that if you take high-dose vitamin C and also L-lysine, has to do with how the Lp(a) actually binds, called lysine binding sites, you could effectively reduce the stickiness of the Lp(a). So there might be ways, again, beyond the, quote, gold standard evidence-based RCT, yada, yada, that you could potentially attenuate your Lp(a) risk. I think, first and foremost, agree with Paul, being metabolically healthy. But beyond that, there's some really interesting physiology that we can talk about. The last thing I'll say about Lp(a) is, isn't it interesting that 10 years ago nobody talked about it, and now everybody's talking about it? And it just so yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting that a lot of these subjects were not in the mainstream, and all of a sudden they are. I mean, that makes sense, though, that with social media and with all of the discussions that are freely available to people, that it would be, but it's interesting nonetheless.
I was surprised. It was on my Substack, the most popular newsletter I ever wrote.
Really?
On a pretty, what would seem like an esoteric topic.
I never hear anybody talk about it.
So many people were fascinated by it. The observation I'm making, again, incentive structures. 10 years ago, people didn't talk about it. Now, there are New England Journal trials on 5 different medications targeting it. Interesting. So, incentive structures is a point that I keep coming back to. Not people being sinister or, corruption scandals, just simply incentive structures. I think we need to understand that, be it science, medicine, influencers talking, in order to really understand the nuances of the debate. But should we get into seed oils?
Can we get into metabolic health real quick?
Yeah.
I just want people to understand, because we touched on this a little bit. I think people are probably, you and I clearly agree that the most important thing is to be metabolically healthy. And I just want people to understand that most doctors do not test for this, but it's super easy. It's a fasting insulin test. It's you fast overnight, you get an insulin level in the morning. It's not perfect. If you pair a fasting insulin with a continuous glucose monitor, you mentioned those earlier, you have sort of a fasting insulin and you have a proxy for a postprandial insulin with the postprandial glucose. So you can look at the shape of your CGM curve. And I think those two things, a fasting insulin will cost you $30 if you pay cash. And if you look at the distribution of fasting insulin, I think the average in the States is like 9 micro IU per ml, but there are other metrics that suggest that 90+% of the United States is metabolically unwell. So I think it's reasonable to suggest to people, just to give guidance, that you want your fasting insulin to be far below 9. I think the best level is probably below 5. Most of the time when I check mine, it's less than 3. And again, fasting insulin it's a $30 test. You can get it online. Although it's democratized, lab companies now, if your doctor won't order it for you, you need a new doctor. I think that if every doctor ordered a fasting insulin, you can immediately get a sense of where you are on some sort of a metabolic health curve. No test is perfect, but it's pretty darn good. Pop the hood, oil, check the dipstick. Okay, you're good. You got a fasting insulin of 4.5, not bad.
It should be below 5 what? What is the measurement?
It's micro IU per ml.
I have to say one more thing before we get to seed oils around psychiatry. And I just think this is really important for people to hear, because
Paul was a psychiatrist, so he didn't practice, he said, but that was what he got, he specialized in, was psychiatry. So, and he says some really interesting things at the beginning of this. So if you want to go back and watch this and watch the beginning where he talks about why he didn't want to practice in psychiatry and what he found about the industry itself, it's very interesting.
The diseases we battle with, when you don't have this metabolic mechanistic picture, they become, ephemeral and abstract. And nowhere is that a bigger problem than in psychiatry. Paul was talking about his training, and the nature of the field is that every diagnosis is clinical. You don't really go with biomarkers. And, because the brain is such a black box, it leads people to thinking that like the brain and the mind, which is emergent from it, isn't just a metabolic organ and phenomenon. And so the emerging research, this is one of the areas I find most fascinating, is like how brain metabolism influences the human mind. So I'll give a couple examples, both out of like top papers that came out this year in 2025. One was on autophagy in the brain. Something really interesting.
Which means what?
Basically, it's a cellular recycling process where you like break up and clean things. People often associate it with like fasting. There was a study, I think it was in Nature. Again, I can send all the references after the fact, but basically what they showed is that in depression, autophagy is dysfunctional in a brain region called the lateral habenula, which, think about it, as the depression center. Leads to a buildup of the receptors for the excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain called glutamate. It basically dials up your quote-unquote depression. And another interesting thing is like the drugs we use to treat human beings, so SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, ketamine, different classes of
Yeah.
antidepressants, they converge on this pathway to like alter this basic metabolic function. I think wrapping some context around all the things that can happen to omega-6 inside the body, depending on individual factors, would be fun.
If people understand what linoleic acid is, we might want to back up
what is it?
and do fats. I mean,
Go ahead.
yeah. So we touched on this earlier.
I like the fact that Paul Saladino is trying to speak to a wider audience. The thing with Nick Norwitz, he does a lot of times, is you have to consider your audience. So you need to make sure that you know everybody's not a doctor in your audience, or everybody's not a scientific person, or everybody doesn't understand medical jargon. That's something that I think he'll probably learn over time. And, a lot of the time he does a really good job, but sometimes he forgets. It's like, who are you talking to? And with this guy, this is a good exercise for him because, he's obviously not a scientific person. So,
Can you see if it's on there?
Oh, your insulin?
I'm betting you a meat stick that I brought you. That it's not.
You already gave me the meat sticks. I'm not giving them back. Those are mine.
I'm betting you
They're
it's-
delicious.
I'm taking one back if it's not on there.
I'm South African. I will fight you for that, Drew Horse.
So when we have fats, we have saturated fats, right, which is a chain of carbons, and all the carbons have hydrogens. All of the positions of the carbon atom are occupied by hydrogen. When you have a monounsaturated fat, you have one double bond.
You owe me a meat stick.
Oh,
It's
he gets-
on there?
He gets a meat
3.2.
stick.
3.2.
That's pretty good, right? Less than 5 micro-IU per ml. So just to complete the discussion there,
If you'd have known who ordered this for me, you wouldn't have made that bet.
yeah, maybe they were listening. They were listening to some of these conversations around this more broadly. So, from my perspective there, I would say, okay, you're pretty metabolically healthy. Let's actually look at your risk with this LDL. I would not have recommended ezetimibe to you. I'm not your physician.
Okay.
right? So anyway, that's the conversation
And
there.
then cut it out.
Well, don't take my advice. I'm not your doctor.
Oh, really? I take all my medical advice from the
You're
internet.
you're a sovereign human. You're a sovereign human.
Yeah.
So back to the fats. You have
Yeah.
saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats. Saturated fats sound bad, but again, this is because of the zeitgeist. It's because we've been programmed to do. Saturated fats are
Yes.
they're chains of carbons with a carboxylic acid on one end, and they have no double bonds. Monounsaturated fats have one double bond. Polyunsaturated fats have 2 or more double bonds.
Right.
So linoleic acid is an 18 carbon omega-6 polyunsaturated fat with 2 double bonds. The omega-6 means the first double bond is at the carbon 6 positions from the end of the molecule.
Okay.
So that's just how we name fats, because we'll talk about omega-3s. We can talk about omega-3. First double bond is closer to the end of the molecule. That's all that means.
Right.
So you
Polyunsaturated fats for the layman are seed oils, right?
not necessarily, right? Because a polyunsaturated fat technically just means it has 2 or more double bonds, right?
Okay.
If let's take soybean oil, which is the most commonly consumed seed oil, as an example. Soybean oil, we can fact check this. I'd say it's around 50+% linoleic acid. So 50+% of what's in soybean oil is linoleic acid, but maybe 1 or 2% of what's in linoleic of what's in soybean oil might be alpha linolenic acid, which is an omega-3 polyunsaturated fat. And then there's also going to be monounsaturated fats in soybean oil, and a very small amount of saturated fats in a soybean oil. So
Right.
no seed oil is purely polyunsaturated fat, and no animal fat, butter, is not purely saturated either, right?
Right.
So
that's a very good explanation. I got to respect the way he's laying this out, again, for the audience to understand.
polyunsaturated fat is not synonymous with seed oils. Part of the concern for me with seed oils is that they do contain large amounts of polyunsaturated fats, right? Specifically omega-6
Yes.
polyunsaturated fat, that is linoleic acid. When you're talking about fish oil, you're talking about omega-3 predominant polyunsaturated fats. Our consumption of linoleic acid is by far the single greatest polyunsaturated fat that we consume in our diets.
Okay.
Not even close to omega-3s, right? We're talking about, a few.
And this was something that we did not historically used to do. Because the seed oils are used in the processed food industry and just mass marketed and everybody started using them, it's a big difference between before now and what we used to do.
People who are supplementing with fish oil might have 2 grams or a gram to 2 grams of omega-3. In 2025, the average American consumes 5 tablespoons of seed oils, which is
A day?
a day.
When you say seed oils,
Right.
are you saying linoleic acid and omega-6, or are you saying... So the way...
So let's break it down simple for people.
People see this?
For people that don't know, for people that get all their information from YouTube and from RFK, seed oils are bad for you. And fish oils and things like avocado oil and olive oil and butter, these things are good for you, right?
A little more complicated than that, but
It is a little bit more complicated, but if you want to break it down, make it binary, that's basically how most people understand it.
So I think the main confusion point is So I'm holding up, I don't know if people can see, a little diagram here of fatty acids. There's saturated and unsaturated. We can talk about saturated separately, a very complex group in and of itself. Within unsaturated, there's mono unsaturated, 1 double bond, or poly unsaturated. Within poly unsaturated, there's omega-3, so like fatty fish, fish oil, and then there's omega-6. And this omega-6 more or less synonymous with linoleic acid just because of the proportions that are consumed. The way I want to define seed oils and stick to these terms as best we can, because I think this, if nothing else, is the main confusion point. If omega-6 rich foods are like highly refined and processed to get the oil that is heated and has additives added to it, that is the highly industrialized seed oil.
True.
And I think one of the big issues that arises is conflating omega-6 and seed oil. So let's start, because I think this is where we're going to have the biggest disagreement about omega-6. So
we can
the
talk
physiologic impacts of omega-6 specifically, and then we'll talk about processing.
Well, we can talk about relative amounts because I think this is an interesting point. So what Nick is saying, so just back to what we were just saying. So the average American consumes 5 tablespoons of seed oils per day. The most commonly consumed seed oil is soybean, perhaps followed by canola. Soybean is approximately 50%, give or take, linoleic acid.
And where are they getting all of this from?
It could be it's probably French fries, it's in breads, it's in salad dressings. So the majority of seed oils people are consuming are heated. That's an important point also.
Just basic processed foods.
Processed foods.
Right.
And so, and I think a lot of it is French fries, a lot of it is chips, right? Those oils are boiled and heated. So there's even nuance in the seed oil conversation that goes deeper, right? You can have a seed oil, which, as Nick correctly points out, is industrially refined, bleached, and deodorized oil, soybean oil, canola oil, peanut oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. It's sitting on the shelf in a grocery store in a plastic container that can leach antimony into the oil. It's a transparent plastic container. So that is a fragile oil by nature of being polyunsaturated that is being exposed to light and oxygen for months at a time. This is just, and then you take those oils, and most of those oils that we consume today are then heated, right? You're either frying with them in a pan or you're deep frying with them. So there are levels to perhaps the potential harm of these oils. As you heat an unstable oil, it becomes more problematic, more inflammatory mediators are generated. So we can talk about heated seed oils, we can talk about unheated seed oils, and as Nick is pointing out, we should differentiate that from not even processed sources of omega-6, things like walnuts, right? That walnuts contain moderate amounts of omega-6. They also contain moderate amounts of omega-3. But what I wanted to point out here is that, so let's just say corn oil is another commonly consumed oil, seed oil, industrially refined, bleached, and deodorized oil in our diet today. Again, chips, cakes, cookies, packaged foods. You look at labels, they're everywhere. French fries, obviously, it's in bread at all the fast food restaurants. Processed foods.
Yeah.
In order to get 5 tablespoons of corn oil, you would have to eat 60 ears of corn, right? Something that humans would never have done historically. 5 tablespoons of soybean oil is 2.5 pounds plus of soybeans.
And that's very interesting. Think about that. So not only are the oils themselves historically not something we consume, okay, these concentrated packed, just you get a tiny bit, but it comes from a whole lot of the food. So you're exposing yourself to things that we were never exposed to before, which is one of the points that I make on the fact that it's not food. It's something altered. It's something chemically altered from a food, but it's not food itself.
5 tablespoons of peanut oil, something the same. You can look at these amounts. It's just just to say, like, a walnut the amount of linoleic acid in a walnut pales in comparison to a tablespoon of, walnut oil is not really a seed oil because it's so unstable. It has so much omega-3, people never use walnut oil. It gets rancid so fast. But like a soybean is not the same as a tablespoon of soybean oil, right? A tablespoon of soybean oil is the equivalent of, hundreds of soybeans.
Sure.
And that's not even the best example. You have 2.5 plus pounds of soybeans to get 5 tablespoons of oil. These are evolutionarily, and again, I'm sort of stacking the deck in my favor. But I'm trying to say this as just in an unbiased way as possible. These are evolutionarily difficult amounts of oils to obtain from the actual parent foods.
Right.
So that's interesting. So we have those 3 differentiators. We're talking about omega-6 linoleic acid occurs in most unprocessed foods that you or I eat today. There is omega-6 linoleic acid in a grass-fed steak. Mm-hmm. It's a small amount, right? It's perhaps 1%. 1% of the fat in a steak is linoleic acid. 50% of the fat in soybean oil is linoleic acid. So you see there's a spectrum, right? An egg yolk contains linoleic acid.
Right.
So there's a difference between saying linoleic acid is, per se harmful, or is there a dose, or is there a form factor here as well? So yeah, and we can differentiate all those things, but that's just something I wanted to differentiate for people. Like historically, our consumption of linoleic acid today is 10x, 1,000% higher than it ever has been historically, because of our consumption of seed oils.
Do we know when our consumption, this 5 tablespoons per day, started? Like when did this start, and like how has it grown?
The first seed oil was introduced in 1911. Procter & Gamble made Crisco, right? So 1900.
I do a video on the origins of seed oil, like where they started and how P&G got started and why. If you're interested in that, I'll link it above.
There were essentially 99% of the fat we ate was animal fat in 1900. And just to give context, again, record keeping not the same, but the heart attack wasn't even a thing. There was no diagnosis of heart attack in 1900. Wow, that's Humans didn't have like chest pain. Like that, this clinical syndrome is not defined until much later. Yeah, so
holy shit, global production of is vegetable oil the same thing?
Yeah, vegetable oil is the euphemism, right? So seed oil is
look, it shows all of them: palm, soybean, canola. Yeah. Wow.
So 1911 is Crisco, and then more and more become a part of it. There's interesting history from Procter & Gamble and the American Medical Association that I can mention because we're on the topic. So the American Medical Association, I think, was started in the 1850s, but it didn't really rise to prominence until the mid 1900s. And part of that was a major grant from Procter & Gamble to the AMA. So there's a lot of speculation. Again, it's just purely speculation, but Procter & Gamble makes Crisco. Procter & Gamble was really behind the popularization of, at that time, hydrogenated seed oils into the public sphere in place of butter and lard, right? Because animal fats, 1900, 99% of what we eat is animal fat. And then Procter & Gamble makes Crisco. They say it's cheaper, it's healthier, it's white. It's not going to raise your LDL. As we begin to understand lipoproteins, we can talk about saturated fats versus monounsaturated and poly and their effect on Apo B and LDL. In 1939, I think, give or take, Procter & Gamble makes the equivalent today of a $100,000 donation to the American Medical Association for their sort of radio show. And then the American Medical Association begins to sort of get more on this polyunsaturated fat bandwagon. You can find ads from, I would say, the 1950s and 60s of, these are incredible ads. I think they're from maybe Mazola corn oil, but you can see this becoming a part of the zeitgeist. And there's a great ad. Maybe you can find it, Steve.
I remember
it's like Denise or whoever it is, polyunsaturated her family tonight. So they're talking about cooking with this corn oil.
What?
There are these crazy ads. Yeah. So like, anyway, they become a part of the conversation and the cultural milieu over the last, let's say, 100 years, give or take, starting in 1911. Before that, essentially, cottonseed oil was made in the 1860s, but not used in food until 1911. Previously, most people know this, but previously seed oils were used for lamp oils and for engine oils. And they were used in World War II on submarines and ships because they retain
lubricant, industrial lubricant,
their slipperiness when they're wet.
I think there's a way, I want to see if you agree, that we can inspire curiosity and awe in the physiology of all of this. It's not about understanding, like, I don't need to write a post and somebody reads it like, I got all of this. You get 20% of it, great. Provided you went through the process and enjoyed it. Like finding the awe in learning about science, metabolism, physiology is a gift that I think we can give to people. And with that humility and the curiosity that I honestly think curiosity can save lives. It's a difficult task, but I think it's one that can be.
Curiosity is the reason science exists. I mean, real science, like pure science, is because people are curious by nature and they seek to investigate things. So he's right about that.
Accomplished. Maybe I'm just naive.
The more I know, I realize the more I don't know. After the last 3.5 hours, I realized.
That's another thing about science is that you end up learning that you don't know about. Like you'll go into something thinking an experiment or whatever. You go into it thinking you understand something, and you more often than not, find out that you do not understand something. And then you'll find a piece of information, or you'll discover something from the investigation, and you'll have one piece of information, but you still don't know how everything fits together necessarily. And some things we piece together and some things we haven't. And a lot of things historically that we did not piece together, we do not have objective, solid, absolute evidence of something. They just run with it like it's true. That's one of the biggest problems because of special interests, because of all the stuff that they've been talking about in these podcasts, is that there's an incentive to just make profits and off of feeding people garbage or feeding people harmful things. And there's no proof that it is harmful. There's no proof that it isn't harmful, because food, when you're looking at nutrition, they're not looking at, hey, did you stop eating garbage and you feel better? And that's not in the medical establishment. They don't ever talk about that. They're not using that as something to move forward. They're only looking at, I'm not going to look at anything unless it's a clinical, randomized, controlled clinical trial. So you have a huge swaths of the population are reversing all of their medical conditions because of the food that they put in their mouth, and that doesn't concern you. You're not going to talk to your patients about nutrition. You're not going to do anything about that. That is wrong. But that's the way it works here, especially in the United States and around the world. Like, that's just the medical profession nowadays. It's, come to me and tell me you got a problem, and I'm going to have a pill for that, because that's how they make their money.
I don't know jack shit about any of this stuff.
But it's fun, right? It's like, this is an interesting idea.
Yeah.
And then you grapple with it, and what I want to applaud Paul for, not just here but like offline, is you're someone who I feel like I can have a genuine, open intellectual conversation with, and where we can start like a public conversation, and we didn't actually get to like nailing down the numbers, but like if I said, what is your opinion on a 0 to 10 scale, and you start at X point, you'd be fine saying, hey, I kind of shifted on this in a very non-defensive manner, and I think genuinely. Some people are like virtue signally about it, but I think we need more of that. And it's hard because I keep pulling it back to, but incentive structures. The incentive structure doesn't always favor saying, hey, let's sit down and have a nuanced conversation between people who have differing ideas and see like what evolves from this conversation. We can both think of examples of people who might be a little bit negative on having open discussions or representing things honestly. Well,
thank you guys for doing this, man. This has been super fun. Paul, where can people find you online?
It's Paul Saladino MD everywhere. All the socials, website. Perfect. Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Nick?
My name, Nick Norwitz, Norwitz. I don't think there's another Nick Norwitz around, and I'm really having fun with my Substack right now, staycuriousmetabolism.com. So you can check it out there. And thanks for having us, Danny.
Beautiful.
Thanks for having us. Can I just add one more thing?
Of course.
I think that we've talked about a lot today, and I appreciate Nick, having this conversation. It's fun to talk to somebody as smart as he is about all these kind of ideas and share things and learn from each other. I think that a lot of this probably is overwhelming for people. Maybe you felt a little overwhelmed at times, but in my mind, this is just how I conceptualize it. If you just take a step, if you can move one step beyond a calories model and start to think about a theme that we came to a lot of times in this podcast around food quality and the difference between food components and whole foods, you're going to be light years ahead. You know, it's like, look, you said at the beginning of the podcast, when you don't eat carbs, quote unquote, which I'm imagining is processed breads and things like this, cakes, you feel much better. That's about all people need to know. You know, like if you move away from energy balance, which is probably a psyop started by Global Energy Balance and Coca-Cola, along with many other nutritional psyops, I just think that there's actually potentially an active movement to confuse the consumer. And then we throw our hands up and we think, oh, calories is the simplest model. I'm just not going to eat too much. And I think that's exactly the wrong decision, right? I think that if humans just focus on food quality and whole foods, as overused as that word is, from animal and plant origins, you are going to do better. You're going to get healthier. And that's really all you need to know. And it doesn't need to be overly complicated. You can dive into little things that we went down the rabbit hole on this podcast. But I think that if you move away from calories and you move toward the idea of food quality, you're on the right track. Just keep following your nose from there and you'll do good.
I also want to just add, you use the word overwhelmed. And I love that because I hope people feel that. I hope people feel that. And the reason being is like if you go to the gym, you want to be, have a good workout, feel exhausted, and then what's the term? Progressively overload. Why should learning be any different?
Well, I got a criticism for Nick. A lot, he forgets who his audience is. And the thing is about learning is like, yes, that's true, is that you need to try to learn things, try to understand things. I mean, that's for humans. It's like, you're going to be the most successful if you do things like that. If you just want to sit on your couch and eat your ding dongs and, I don't know, watch your soap operas. That's what they used to say back in the day. But you're not going to progress, right? But you have to understand who you're talking to. And, if you start sounding like a medical dictionary at some point, you need to back it up because you're going to lose people. People are going to pass out. I've made people fall asleep. I mean, I know. I mean, I give basically a chemistry class in one of my previous videos, and I think I put quite a few people to sleep doing it. So I had to change up how I was doing it because there is a lot of interest in learning a lot of the scientific stuff. But you have to do it in a way that, everybody's busy and especially, and everybody doesn't have. I mean, this podcast itself is 3 hours and 29 minutes long. That's why I was taking snippets out of it to try to highlight, to get people to go listen to it. But at the same time, who has that kind of time nowadays? So especially if you're speaking over people. So what I found was I was very impressed with Paul Saladino from this. This is I'm surprised, pleasantly surprised, because what I've seen of him has, I think, been very hyperbolic, like examples and goofy examples of things in the past that were kind of wacky. So just can't, I don't know, you just don't know. If you just see a small thing out of context, you don't know really what to think of people,
Yeah, we're not going to go gentle on you because this conversation had a lot of chapters, and I think we went into the weeds and then pulled back. You don't need to get everything, but if you're willing to engage with these conversations and progressively overload your learning, just like going to the gym, like, that is awesome. Like, that is the journey. And yes, the big picture of like, if you just kind of like go back to basic principles, eat whole foods, that's great. But I do feel that learning about it gives you the insight and excitement to like engage in that, be quote unquote compliant with that, and then evolve and tweak the way you live indefinitely and enjoy that process. That's how I live. I think that's how Paul lives, how you have evolved your diet so many times. And that will make your nutrition journey not a chore, but a hell of a lot of fun. And you'll inevitably end up in a good place.
What are you going to eat for dinner tonight, Danny?
That's a good question. I'm thinking about probably a steak.
That's a good choice. Safe.
No sides.
So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I really did. I watched the entire thing, and it's a lot, but I'll link the whole video in the description below. I highly recommend, if you have the time, go and check it out because they cover a lot more than what I went over. But it is hard to watch a podcast that's that long. So, but anyway, you guys let me know what your thoughts are on all of this. What did you think about the two doctors, and What did you think about the information they covered? And let me know in the comments section down below. And if you like this video, if you could give me a like, I'd really appreciate it. And if you want to, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next video. Bye.